Hello, good afternoon. Hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for coming out. This is kind of the wrap-up of things, and so it's great that people are showing up for this event. I want to welcome you to the 2025 Annual Conference and Book Fair in Los Angeles California for AWP. I am Kwame Dawes, a member of the AWP Board of Directors. And here's a visual description of myself. I'm a black bespectacled man wearing a black cap that says word, a black sweater as well is what you'll see from here. The Association of Writers and Writing Programs is a small but mighty non-profit organization that amplifies the voices of writers and the academic programs and organizations that serve them, all while championing diversity and excellence in creative writing. I'm a member of AWP's Board of Directors, but first and foremost, I'm a member of AWP, and membership with AWP provides me with writing resources year-round, but just as importantly, it allows me to support other writers, especially those who are just starting out. And I came here, I've been at AWP almost 20 times or more, so it's been a minute. My membership dues help writers find meaningful careers and publications opportunities and makes services like the Writer to Writer mentorship program possible. If you aren't already, I invite you to become a member today of AWP. Now, we are delighted to bring you this event today, and I would like to acknowledge and thank all of our conference sponsors and the literary partner hosting this event, which is PEN American. Our literary partners and sponsors allow AWP to present these extraordinary literary events and help us keep our conference affordable and accessible. Please join me in thanking all of our conference sponsors and partners for their support and participation, and of course, thanking PEN America. So let's give them a hand. Thank you very much. Now, before we start, I do need to do some brief housekeeping work. First of all, please silence your cell phones. And if mine goes off right now, it's because I haven't done it yet. But as soon as I'm done with this, I will silence my cell phone. It will just be my luck. Remember, there's no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect seats marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. And please give the authors about 10 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing table before approaching them to have your book signed. I thank you, and now it is my great pleasure and honor to welcome Clarisse Rosaz Shariyf, who will introduce this fantastic event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kwame. Thank you so much for welcoming us today. Good afternoon, everyone. You've made it to Saturday, and you've chosen to join us in this room, so I'm delighted.
We're bad in cleanup.
That's right. But it's a beautiful room, and I was going to say, oh, come closer, but you guys are already so close, so we're good. We're good to go. So thank you for being here. I'm the interim co-CEO and chief program officer of literary programming at PEN America. And among many other things, I have the privilege of overseeing some of our major programmatic areas, such as the Literary Awards and Grants Program, the annual World Voices Festival of International Literature, some of our wonderful fellowships and workshops. And for those of you who may not know about our organization, let me just say a few things. PEN America is a 100-year-old writers' organization and free expression organization. We fight for writers and defend their right to speak and write freely. We celebrate, nurture, and protect the power of imagination, the freedom to write, read, learn, and speak, because it matters here and around the world. Literature, in my view, but I think I don't have to convince you here in this room, is essential to a democratic, healthy, and diverse society. We have citizens and communities that are committed to facts and truth, capable of wrestling with difficult ideas and dialogue across differences, and value understanding and empathy. We're especially thankful for our nationwide membership of writers, readers, and allies. And in addition to the work that we've done, that I've mentioned, we do campaign for writers under attack here and across the globe. So I invite you to maybe join the good fight, and you can speak to some of our colleagues at the booth and find out more about our organization and our work. And I would like to thank our team that is based here in LA under the leadership of Allison Lee. Thank you to the AWP team. This conference was awesome, and they do such a great job, and I can't wait to be back next year. So today, we're here for a conversation with the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 29 novels, Jodi Picoult. I know she doesn't need an introduction, but just a few words. Her most recent novel is By Any Other Name. Her landmark novel, 19 Minutes, is the most banned book in the United States, according to a recent report from PEN America. Her books have been translated into 34 languages. Her 2 YA novels were co-written with her daughter, Samantha Van Leer, and she's a trustee of PEN America, and she lives in New Hampshire. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So this afternoon, we're here to discuss the female gaze, powerful narratives for the times, with a master storyteller. Jodi, in a recent interview, I think, you've said you believe that the last 35 years of your career have led you to writing your latest book.
Yeah.
I can't wait to dive in to our conversation about the particular genius of women writers and storytellers and the fight they have to lead even today to be recognized. So let's welcome again Jodi. So I'd like to just start maybe briefly, what's the origin story of By Any Other Name? Why did you have to write this book and when did you decide to do it?
So let's actually back up and talk about the female gaze.
Yes.
Right? Because this is probably, and I've said this many times, this is probably the most personal book I've written, which is pretty remarkable given that it is a dual timeline, one that takes place in the modern day and one that takes place in the 1580s, and follows a real life historical figure named Amelia Bassano, who I know we're going to talk about in a bit. To me, the female gaze is all about spinning a narrative to put a woman at the center, to make sure that a woman's story is not marginalized, but the meat of the very story itself. And it's giving women an equal point of view to a male point of view. It is allowing a female character to get angry, to take up space, to choose power. All of those things are usually terrifying for men. And because of that, we haven't seen a lot of writing through the female gaze. It is usually demeaned and dismissed. And to give you an example of that, a very current one, when George R.R. Martin writes about sex and dragons, it's fantasy. When Rebecca Yarros does it, it's fairy smut, right?
Yeah.
Why?
Right.
Right, and and that's a very interesting duology or dichotomy. The question of why we have to constantly cut off a story that centers a woman and a woman's point of view because it threatens someone else is something that we haven't really spent enough time looking at. So this book came to me really very organically. I was an English major, like I'm sure a lot of people here were, and I fell in love with Shakespeare. And the reason I fell in love with Shakespeare was because of the incredibly three-dimensional female characters that were created in the plays. Beatrice and Portia and Rosalind and Kate, nobody was writing women like that, right? And when I was in college a million years ago, I had a professor who said, there's a question about whether Shakespeare wrote all his own plays. And like every other English major, I was like, well, that's ridiculous. Of course he wrote his plays. And I didn't think about it for years. And then I read an article in The Atlantic by a woman named Elizabeth Winkler, who was looking at the authorship question and who mentioned a fact that just stopped me in my tracks, which is that Shakespeare had 2 daughters that survived childhood, and he did not teach either of them to read or write. And I was like, hang on. There's no way the guy who wrote those amazing three-dimensional female characters would not have taught his own daughters how to read or write. And Elizabeth was looking into the authorship question, which is not new. For years, we've seen many other men posed as potential authors of the Shakespearean plays, everyone from Francis Bacon to Christopher Marlowe to the Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere, and very few women have ever been held up as candidates. But Elizabeth did, and she mentioned the name of a woman named Emilia Bassano. And the deeper I fell into that rabbit hole, the more I realized that almost effortlessly, Emilia's life intersected with the plays in ways that Shakespeare's never could.
Yeah, that's great. And actually, this is a perfect segue because I did want to get a little bit of, you know, your beautiful writing into this conversation. And let's just read a very, very short passage about Emilia, and we'll come back to Emilia.
As Emilia grew older, she understood what it was like to no longer fit inside your own body. Her legs lengthened, her breasts ripened. She grew into her enormous gray eyes and plush mouth. Those changes were noted by Hunsdon, by courtiers who lost the thread of whatever conversation they were having when she passed, by noble women who glanced at her with jealousy. But nobody seemed to realize that Emilia's mind was also growing. She would stand on the balcony of her bedroom, staring up at Tycho Brahe's inconstant stars, and wonder how much of the world had to change before you felt the shift in the universe. She could be brought to tears by the flawless blue of a summer sky. She knew that a bed with two people in it could feel emptier than sleeping alone. She felt feral sometimes, wild with conversations she didn't have and dreams she couldn't share. She was a lord's mistress, a lover, a girl who'd managed to rise above her station and would be lucky to remain there if she watched her mouth. Men believed that women were meant to exist on the fringes of their lives instead of being the main characters in their own stories. But why would God have given her a voice if it wasn't meant to be used? In public, Emilia played the part of a decorative object. In private, when she felt too full at the seams of her own life, she spilled all that emotion and intelligence and hope onto pages and pages of poetry, fables, and snippets of dialogue. Emilia wrote from the point of view of the bird of prey, delighting in those few moments of freedom before the jesses were pulled. She wrote fairy tales about princesses who climbed down brick towers, rescuing themselves. She wrote female characters who were adored for both their minds and their beauty. She wrote witty banter with men who were not afraid of a woman who could think for herself. She wrote of what sex must be like when your soul was as invested as your skin. She wrote love poems where sometimes love was fire, sometimes it was rote, and sometimes it was agony. She hid hundreds of pages under her mattress. She did not write happy endings. As any real poet knows, the best tales are the ones that contain a kernel of truth.
Thank you, Jodi. And this is Emilia when she's in her 20s.
Yeah,
early
younger
20s.
than that, actually, yeah. Late teens.
And I thought it just like right there, we're introduced to then what's in her and in her spirit.
I actually remember where I was when I wrote that.
Oh, really? Tell us.
I was weirdly at a teen theater conference, and I suddenly had this idea of what I needed to say. And I remember running up to my room and just sitting down and like vomiting that out, you know, on my computer because I had to say it just that way.
No, and I just wanted to hear like a little bit of, you know, kind of like her voice. I mean, I thought also about what Toni Morrison said about her writing when she was talking about her body of work and how consciously she was making sure that it was not driven by the white gaze. And but she didn't want that to be the dominant gaze in her writing. And with so many of her female characters, Toni, she pushes against that gaze, but the gaze of patriarchy and racism. And I just wanted to just kind of pause and just talk about maybe for you, when you think about your body of work and the work that you've written so far, is that something that you have in your mind, like pushing against the male gaze, figuring out how you're addressing these kind of tensions between the female and male gaze?
So I said this is probably my most personal book. I have been very fortunate. I've worked very hard, but I've been fortunate enough to have a lot of success. And I spent 4 months on book tour this year. And that meant getting up every day and getting on a plane. And I was usually seated next to a man in a business suit. And he would say to me, "What do you do?" And I would say, "I'm a writer." And he'd go, "Children's books?" And I'd say, "No." And he'd go, "Romance." If we ever got to women's fiction, I usually said, "How come there's no men's fiction?" Right? So the fact that we're in 2025 and that we are still pigeonholing women in ways that we expect them and genres we expect them to be writing is really problematic. And the fact that I'm experiencing this means that someone who's starting out at the beginning of their career, who is a woman writing and maybe raging against the machine, is definitely going to be experiencing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're a troublemaker.
I am.
Right? So I just have to ask, right away. I mean, you are taking on Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And pissing off a lot of
Many people. Yeah.
Especially the people who have had a long career, writing about, the man from Stratford. So tell us about that. Why take that on?
Well, because we're all working from the same primary resources, right? So when someone who is a Shakespearean scholar tells you they know categorically that Shakespeare wrote all of his work, there's no way they can know that any more than I can say he absolutely didn't. We're all working from the same material. So I'm going to convince all of you, by the way, I'm really good at this. So let me tell you what we actually know about William Shakespeare. We know that he was an actor, a businessman, and a producer. We know that he evaded taxes twice. We know that he had multiple restraining orders taken out against him by business colleagues. We know that when there was a famine in Stratford, he bought all the grain and made his neighbors pay double. Doesn't he kind of sound like another businessman that we all know in this country a little bit? We also know that he never left the country, but he managed to write about places that were so detailed that the things he wrote about they weren't in guidebooks at the time. So for example, the location of the Queen of Denmark's closets in her bedchamber. That's not something you're going to find, in a guidebook. He never played a musical instrument, but there are more references to music in the Shakespearean plays than any other body of work. He was not formally educated. We know he didn't go to university. There's a question about whether he even went to primary school. Again, not a big deal. But when he died, he did not own a single book, not one. And it wasn't like there were libraries, so I don't know where he was doing all this amazing research. When he died, although his name was by far the best known in the theater world, no other playwright of the time said that we had lost such a great literary light. And also when he died, he was not memorialized or buried in Westminster Abbey, although a lot of people you've never heard of made that cut. Here's what we don't know about Shakespeare, that he actually wrote anything that has his name on it. The only material that we have with Shakespeare's handwriting on it that is a play is somebody else's play, and it's a note he wrote in the margin. That's it.
Wow.
Those are the facts. Those are the bare facts. And then, of course, you get someone like Amelia, who has a very different kind of upbringing and a lot of crossover in places that Shakespeare never had. So Amelia Bassano she was born to a family of remarkable Italian recorder players. They came from a town called Bassano del Grappa, Italy. Tiny little town. And Henry VIII went over and heard them playing and was like, I must have them, and brought them all back to be the recorder consort to the king. And then they eventually became the recorder consort to Queen Elizabeth. They happened to be Jewish. When they moved to England, they couldn't be Jewish anymore, so they had to hide their faith. When Amelia was 7 years old, her dad died. And she was given as a ward to the Countess of Kent, who is absolutely the MVP in Amelia's life, because she gives Amelia a full classical and legal education, which would have been extraordinary for a noble daughter, much less some random kid who was just the ward of, of this countess. When Amelia's 12 years old, the Countess gets remarried, and she moves to the Netherlands with her husband, and her husband doesn't want to take Amelia. So Amelia's kind of like this piece of lost baggage, and she winds up living with the Countess's brother, a man named Peregrine Barty, who happens to be the ambassador for England to Denmark. And the summer that Amelia's living with him, he does take a diplomatic mission to Denmark, where he meets the king and the queen. He has dinner with an astronomer named Tycho Brahe, whose supernova is actually the very first star mentioned in Hamlet. And also Tycho Brahe's two relatives have dinner with him, who just happen to be named Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Okay, just important to point out again, Shakespeare never left the country. Okay, so now Amelia's 12. When she's 13, she becomes the mistress of the Lord Chamberlain of England. He is 56, she is 13. Oh my God. Yeah, not great. But the Lord Chamberlain was in charge of all theater and entertainment in England. So for the 10 years that Amelia's living with him, she absolutely meets every single theater owner, producer, actor, and writer, playwright in the country working with him. Because his job is literally to vet the plays before they're allowed on stage. When she lives with him for 10 years, and then she gets pregnant. And you can't be a pregnant mistress. So he kicks her out of the house, gets her married off to her very terrible cousin, Alfonso Lanier, who is abusive, and settles a big sum of money on her. And Alfonso winds up blowing through all the money immediately. So now she is pregnant, she has a baby, she has a husband she hates, she has to find a way to support her family. And we don't hear from her for 20 years. And then suddenly in her mid-40s, she becomes the first published female poet ever in England. Now that is huge. Like, we should all know Amelia's name just because of that. Not that you do. But poets, especially female poets, don't jump up in their 40s out of nowhere. And I really do think that she was writing before that and using someone else's name. And I believe that she paid William Shakespeare for the use of his name. But wait, can I convince you more?
I mean, you're on a roll, Jodi.
Yeah,
Go
okay.
ahead.
So I could literally sit here for the next 10 years and talk about this, but what I'll give you is my favorite example of the way that the plays intersect with her. So, you know, for example, you heard a little bit about Hamlet and how it seems like her life might have crossed that a little bit. Add to that the fact that the player queen in Hamlet is named Baptista, which happens to be Amelia's middle name, not a very common name at the time. Or the fact that as we've seen a rise of female Shakespearean scholars, many of them talk about poor doomed Ophelia, who actually is mad when Hamlet is not. And what they believe is that Hamlet probably got her pregnant. There's a lot of textual evidence of that. And she tried to tell someone, but Gertrude doesn't listen, her dad doesn't listen, her brother doesn't listen, Hamlet doesn't listen. And so there's that very famous scene where Ophelia is giving out herbs, right, to everybody, because she's gone totally crazy. And as she's giving out herbs, every single herb that she gives out is something that would induce an abortion. Now, that is not something I think William Shakespeare knew, but Amelia, who was kicked out of a house because she was pregnant, I think she would have known that. But my favorite example comes from Othello. So Othello is called The Tragedy of Othello, the Moor of Venice. It's based on a 15th century Italian short story by a guy named Cinthio called Gli Hecatomiti. And in it, the only named character is Desdemona. And for years, people have said, wow, I wonder where Shakespeare got that name Othello from. Well, what you should know about Othello is that there's this really great little speech by Iago, the villain, where he's talking about trying to get Othello jealous, which is kind of his job in the play. And he uses a really weird run of imagery. He says, as salt as wolves, as prime as goats, as hot as monkeys. And then he talks about a door of truth, which is really weird, right? Unless you know that in the small town of Bassano del Grappa, Italy, where all of Amelia's family's from, there is a very famous fresco that features wolves, monkeys, and goats, and a woman representing truth between two arched doorways. In that same square, there were two apothecary shops. One was called The Moor. The other was run by a man named Otello. But wait, there are two versions of Othello. The first was published in the first quarto, right? And the second was published a few years later in the first folio with all the rest of Shakespeare's alleged plays. And the difference between them is about 161 lines that were added to the later version. But something really important happened between those two publications, and that was that Shakespeare died. Now, we know Shakespeare did not write those 161 lines. How do we know this? He's dead, literally dead, okay? So someone else wrote them. They are given almost exclusively to a single character in the play, and they are widely considered the first feminist soliloquy in theater. And it's a character talking about how men teach women how to be jealous, how to have revenge, how to have anger, because they model it for us. And the character, of course, who gets to speak this amazing speech is named Amelia. So she leaves her fingerprints literally all over these plays.
Let's do a test.
Yeah, do you believe me yet?
You're
convinced,
how,
right?
How,
Yeah.
how convinced are you?
Good.
So, I mean, Emilia Bassano was pretty badass.
She's so badass. I
But
love her.
there's the other character, main character in the book is Melina Green.
Melina, yeah.
And, you know, so tell us about Melina, because obviously you're with Emilia.
I am 100% with Amelia, yeah.
But who is Melina, and why was it important to actually introduce Melina?
So in the book, Melina is actually a descendant of Amelia's. She is a modern playwright who can't get her own work out on Broadway because Broadway is still actually a very male-dominated space. And you know, this 100% could have been a historical novel. And I thought about that. But I really wanted to say that what was happening 400 years ago, the eliding of women from history, is still happening today. And so I wanted a parallel story in Melina's space. Everything that Melina is told, Melina creates this, this play based on her ancestor, Amelia, and she can't get it to Broadway because she is told it's too small, it's too emotional, nobody wants to see a girl's coming of age on stage. All of those comments are things I was told to my face when I was writing my first libretto for a Broadway musical. Because in addition to writing novels, I also do that. Yeah. And mind you, I was told that nobody wanted to see a girl's coming of age story when there were two boys' coming of age stories playing next door to each other on Broadway. And that's really interesting, especially in theater when you know 80% of tickets are purchased by women. Yeah. And for me, the real problem is that the theater owners, who are literally a handful of old white men, are the ones who are deciding what gets into their theaters. And when you are from California or Iowa or whatever, and you come into New York and you want to see a Broadway show, and you only see a certain type of show, then you start to think maybe that's the only story worth telling. Yeah. When in reality, there are audiences that want to hear Black stories and brown stories and queer stories and stories of people with disabilities and women's stories and all the stories. There are audiences for all of those. And so that was really important to me, to be able to say that in a theater space in this book as well.
And so this was what was driving your decision to make that historical fiction
versus combining it. Yeah. You know, it's funny, when Between the Lines was the first musical that I was working on, and it was an adaptation of the YA novels that I wrote with my daughter. And my producer actually said to me, I have a co-librettist who I work with, and we're very, very close. And my producer said, I don't think we should put your name on the libretto, because she thought that it would look like a vanity project because I'd also written the novels. And I was like, okay, I mean, if that's what it's gonna take to get it off Broadway, then that's what I'm gonna do. And that's what we did. We actually debuted in 2022 at Second Stage Theater. And when I went to opening night, my name was not in the playbill as a librettist. And I would make that decision again, the same decision Amelia made, the same decision Melina makes in the book, just to get to that point. Really? But after the show closed and the play went into licensing and it's now being performed like all over the US, which is amazing, my co-librettist talked to his lawyer and said, this isn't right. She wrote this, her name should be on it. And I have to tell you, it feels a lot better when you get credit for the work that you do.
That's right.
You know, and we like to think, right? We like to think that we can separate the writer from the art, but we really cannot.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the point of me writing this.
I just want to pause for a second. You said you would make the same decision.
Yeah, I would.
So,
how sad is that?
Right.
Right.
I mean, so
yeah.
You're saying that to young playwrights.
I'm saying that the odds are still against you, and so that I would rather sit here now and be able to tell a crowd, this is what I did and this is why I did it, but you got to see the work. And rectify the wrong afterward. Because if you don't do that, you might never get to see the work, which is not a great place to be, but it's where we are.
Yeah, yeah. I'm letting that sink in.
Yeah, it's a sad and brutal honesty, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. When we were preparing for this conversation, you mentioned that you wanted to talk about what happened when, you know, in your process when you thought you were creating fiction, only to realize that actually you had maybe come close to the truth.
Yeah, this was so fun. Okay, this is the audio-visual portion of our event. So get our slides ready here. So we talked a lot about power and female power, right? And so much of power is about having a choice. And Amelia was constantly reduced to her body. She was a mistress, she was a mother, she was an abused wife. And I just hated that she never got to make a choice. And I wanted to give her something. And I mean, I was ultimately writing fiction, so I could do whatever I wanted, right? And then I happened to read, again, another primary document that just stood up like a little splinter in my mind. When Amelia was in her 50s, her terrible husband died, thank God. And he had had a patent, and she was supposed to get money from the patent, and instead her brothers-in-law stole it. So what did she do? She took him to court. She represented herself just like Portia in Merchant of Venice because she had a full legal education. And she winds up going through the whole trial. And at the very end of the trial, the Earl of Southampton, who is very wealthy, very titled, very well known, comes in and says, hey, this is not my courtroom. If it was, I'd rule in her favor. Peace out. And he leaves. And I was like, what the hell just happened? Because there's no world in Elizabethan England where a peer of the realm would ever intercede in a commoner's trial like that. So then I thought, okay, did they know each other, right? Because when Amelia was at court for 10 years, when she was the mistress to the Lord Chamberlain, that was a really incestuous little society. And of course they would have met. Plus, you know, Amelia was literally 43 years younger than the guy whose mistress she was. The Earl of Southampton was about 4 years younger than she was. He was very well known to be a hottie. And I was like, all right, Amelia, we're gonna get you some, right? So I decided I'm gonna write this whole doomed love affair into my book. And I was gonna have her have this relationship with the Earl of Southampton because it explained to me why, years after they would have separated, he might have shown up at her trial to help her. So I write the whole book, finish it, and I go to England, and I go to the Victoria and Albert Museum because they have the miniature of Amelia in the archives that is widely considered to be Amelia. Let's see if we can do this. There she is. Okay, so that's Amelia, right? She's pretty. We love her. All right, and I go to the V&A, and I'm with the archivist. They let me hold her. Look at how excited I am. I was very excited to be holding that. You know, I mean, when you write about someone who lived 400 years ago and then you get to touch something they would have touched, amazing, like mind blown. And so this is the box of miniatures that was in the archives. They're all painted by a man named Nicholas Hilliard, who was a very famous miniaturist at the time. You can see he really has this a style. He does most of them on a blue field. And the whole time I'm looking at Amelia over there, my eye is drawn to the guy on the right, the guy with the red hair. And I said to the archivist, I'm like, who is this guy? And they say, oh, we don't know. It's an unknown man. That's what we call him. And I asked when it was painted. And they said roughly the same year that Amelia's portrait was. And I said, I think I know who he is. And what they tell me is that this is painted on a playing card, the 6 of Hearts. And the 6 of Hearts in Elizabethan cartomancy, which is kind of like early tarot, basically is the soulmate card. It's supposed to suggest the person that you will never be with because of fate. Also the fact that it's on a black field, that he has his hand like over his heart, all of those like tortured, you know, tortured soul moves would have been decided by the person sitting for that portrait. So I tell them I think it's the Earl of Southampton, and I show them this. This portrait was painted 4 years later. It is an accredited portrait by Nicholas Hilliard, same artist, of the Earl of Southampton. You can see he's wearing the same kind of little white lacy shirt. He has that same long red wavy hair, kind of like mine. And this one is painted also on a playing card. This is on the 3 of Hearts, which in cartomancy means someone has entered our relationship that's going to break us apart. And in my book, that's the year that I pose that Amelia's husband beats her so badly she literally has to crawl to Southampton for help. So I tell this to the archivists, and they're like, what? And they said, we're going to do some more research. So I said, I'm going to do some more research. So I go back home, and I find this portrait to the right. This is another portrait accredited of the Earl of Southampton, painted in 1590, the same year as the miniature on the left. It's painted by a man named John de Critz, and you can really see the similarities between the 2 subjects in those paintings. And so basically, after several months, the archivist got back to me. They sent me a 40-page document with all of the provenance that they'd done on this, and they said that they do believe this was a portrait of the Earl of Southampton, which means that for like 200 years now, Amelia and Southampton have been cozied up next to each other in the V&A, and I think I made that happen. So. Isn't that cool?
That is very cool.
It is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me in all the research I've ever done in 30 years. Yeah.
I mean, no, that's a lot, Jodi.
It was really, yeah.
I don't know if you can top that.
I don't think I can. I should just quit right now, actually, yeah.
No, but that's amazing, and I'm so glad that we were able to do the show and tell.
Yeah, I love that.
That's wonderful.
I always get happy when I see them together.
I was going to say, maybe, so, you know, these people have been writing about Shakespeare, you know, in academia and all.
Oh,
that.
yeah.
So
I've noticed.
Are you in talks, in dialogue with them? Are they pissed? Are they?
Yeah. So I actually said in my author's note that I knew I was going to get more hate mail for this than almost any other book, and that's saying a lot given what I write about. And I have. And it's almost exclusively from white men who are in academia who write to say, I have not read your book and I have no plans to read your book, but you're wrong. It's exactly what I expected. I actually was telling Clarisse at lunch that I recently had to shut down my TikTok account for a week because I had made the grave error of saying that I didn't think Shakespeare wrote all of his plays. And some guy with a tremendous following sicked all of his followers on me to go through all of my posts and to leave horrible trolly comments because he thinks that I'm wrong. And then he went on my daughter's social media, and I was like, okay, no, Mama Bear out, activated, you know, and I said, I'm shutting down the account until he goes away. And it amazes me that, well, it doesn't amaze me. It doesn't amaze me because when you've spent your entire life building your career and your reputation on a specific belief, and then someone comes and says, well, maybe this isn't the truth, I can see why that is threatening and scary. But what I would argue is nobody loves these plays more than I do. And I never wanted to sit here and say, you're all wrong, you're all wrong. What I wanted to say was, we've been looking from this perspective for 400 years. Wouldn't it be fascinating if we went over there and took a peek, just to see what we see? And one of the things that I've loved the most is that in spite of, you know, these terrible emails that I get from certain men, the vast majority of people who have read this book are people who said, I never liked Shakespeare. I never could get into it. But now I absolutely can see my way in.
Wow.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Right? Just that idea that a shift of perspective might give you something in common with the text that has not changed.
Right, absolutely. And that should be the goal, right? That
I think so.
people are reading more.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
I mean, it's an unfortunate segue, but I want to talk about, but it is a segue. I want to talk about book bans, right? And
I am here for you.
Right? I mean, you have been, first of all, you have been an amazing partner and advocate for PEN America's, you know, kind of work on educational censorship and book bans. I mean, we're facing a new administration which is rolling back, I mean, let's just pause for a second on book bans, but they're rolling back everything. Women's rights, civil rights, trans rights, free expression rights, and at a speed that is quite terrifying. And even though we could put the blame around book bans on this new administration, the unfortunate fact is that it's not new, right?
No.
I mean, for now...
It's not new, it's exponential. That's
Exactly.
the difference. Yeah.
And so, for example, in our last report, we tracked more than 10,000 instances of book bans in the 2023-2024 school year. This is more than double the last school year. And the things that we also highlight is what's the common thread across the banned titles, right? So in our last report, we flagged that 36% of all banned titles feature people of color. Or are by writers of color, and 25% included LGBTQ characters or are by LGBTQ plus authors.
Right.
So countless authors, including yourself, are heavily censored, and it's happening in classrooms across the country and also in libraries.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you about your own advocacy. As a writer, what do you feel your role is right now to speak up on this issue? And even when did you start speaking up on this issue?
Well, first of all, I'm not very good at being quiet. Especially if you're going to swipe at me, I'm going to swipe back. And I started speaking out about this when, it was actually PEN, which has, if you want to support PEN for anything, the work that they've done around book bans is astounding, because I literally got to a point where I couldn't count anymore. And thank goodness you guys counted for me. And it was when I started to see that 19 Minutes in particular is the book that has been banned the most, although to be fair, I think over 25 of mine have been banned.
Yeah.
And I think when I started speaking out was when a school district in Florida banned 20 of my titles at once. That's when it was. And one of the books that they banned was actually a book about the Holocaust. Wrap your head around that one. And, and so I felt like, if not me, then who is going to speak up? One of the really great blessings of having a podium and having people who are willing to listen to you is knowing that you can say something and be heard. And so unlike, unfortunately, a lot of young adult authors who are BIPOC or who are LGBTQ and who were being targeted before my books even were, who don't have that platform and don't have that reach, I did. And I knew I could reach people who maybe thought this wasn't going to happen in their community. Spoiler alert, it is going to happen in your community. It is happening in your community. And it's also worth pointing out that the other group that is disproportionately targeted are female writers.
Right.
And what tends to be right now, I think the furor is anything that these parents believe is something that is sexual content, whatever they consider that to be. When they want parental control over the titles that their kids are reading, what they're saying is we want to protect our children. What they're actually doing, of course, is taking away tools that help kids deal with an increasingly difficult and diverse world. And we know there's so many psychological studies that have been done that a kid who feels marginalized, who then sees themselves in the pages of a book, feels a little less marginalized. And that a kid who grows up in a very homogenous environment where everyone thinks the same is able to explore different points of view safely through the pages of a book. So when you start taking those books off a shelf and making them inaccessible, you are not helping anybody at all. Books bridge divides and book bans create divides. Ultimately, the reality is that no parent is afraid of a crayon that wants to be a different color. What they are really afraid of is that a book is dangerous because books give people knowledge and critical thinking. And the idea of their own child growing up and thinking differently than they do is absolutely terrifying. That is why authoritarian regimes burn books. Yeah. And that is why authoritarian regimes ban books.
That's right. And there are so many things that, not just writers obviously can speak up, but I think that, with you and with so many other people involved in our campaign, we're trying to empower readers, writers, members of a community with the tools that they need to actually fight.
Yeah, and Penn has been so good for that, because honestly, that's what I get asked the most from readers. Well, what can I do? How can I fight this? If I don't live in Florida, what am I supposed to do? And the reality is there's a lot you can do. There are letters you can write. There are banned book clubs that you can create. There are things that you can send out to your Congress people. There's so much that you can do, even if it's just buying a banned book that you have the disposable income to afford and sticking it in a little free library somewhere. Even that makes a difference. But there are so many small acts. Most important, if you are thinking about fighting back against banned books, run for your school board, run for your library board, because we need the representation of the people who are against banning in those spaces.
Thank you. You are a great advocate on this issue, I have to say.
I sadly had a lot of practice.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going to switch gears a little bit and just maybe talk a little bit about craft and your writing practice. So, in finding your voice as a writer over these many years, what writers did you turn to for inspiration?
So there are some writers that will always stick with me. My favorite writer of all time is Alice Hoffman. She was the writer who made me a reader again after I stopped reading what was on the syllabus. I graduated from college and suddenly I was like, oh, I can read anything now? And I loved her writing. And the cool thing about Alice is that I then met her at a conference. I was asked to do some event, and I was like, I don't even remember where it was, but I was thinking, I will crawl there if I get to meet her, And when I met her, they always say don't meet your idols, but she was so lovely. And she was like a big sister from the minute that we met. I left there with her phone number, just saying. And, and we're friends now. And I love that. I just love that she became not just an idol to me, but a friend and a mentor. I still remember when I was publishing my very first book, and how they make you go out and look for blurbs, which is like a living hell, right? So I had sent out, to everyone, I'd sent out my manuscript to everybody who I admired, and lo and behold, Anne Hood sent me a note. And it was hysterical because she said, I am moving houses. I've packed up my entire apartment and I had nothing to read, but your galley was in the mail. And I was like, okay. And she said, but I loved it. And she gave me the nicest blurb. And that was the first endorsement I ever got. And it makes me now, when I'm in a very different position and when I have the time and ability, do that for writers that are starting out as well, So I think about paying it forward all the time. I think about how the people I admire the most in this business are not the ones who kicked people to get to the top, but the ones who reached down to pull people up.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've talked a lot about your writing practice and not believing in such a thing as writer's block.
Yeah.
And you talk about what your practice was, especially when you started and you had children. I mean, now you're in a different stage of your life as a writer. Your children are older.
Yeah.
So what has changed, if anything? Do you write differently?
The funny thing is very little has changed, to be honest. I had 3 kids under the age of 4 when I was starting out. I actually was having a baby or a book for a few years, and then I worked that out. But, when I was starting out and I was a young mom, I literally would write when my kids were napping, when they were in nursery school, when they weren't hitting each other over the head with a sippy cup. Like any 10 minutes I had, I was writing. And that's why I don't believe in writer's block, because I really think that writer's block is usually for people who have time to fill. And the best way to describe this is, remember back when you were in college and you had writer's block and you couldn't write your paper? Isn't it amazing how that went away the night before the paper was due, right? So, I learned how to write on demand. And believe me, there were days I wrote absolute garbage, but I've always said you can edit a bad page, but you can't edit a blank page. Like that's always been my mantra. And the reality is that even now when my kids are not home, You know, I just have 2 dogs and a husband who are a whole different kind of needy. But, you know, I still am doing the same thing. I'm basically waking up in the morning, I swim a mile, I go up to my desk, I pull up what I was working on, I edit my way through it, and then I keep going until the end of the day. And it's like that practice. It's that daily practice of doing it over and over. I don't count words. I never understood people who counted words. Because like there's some days when if I'm writing a court scene, I can write 50 pages like that. But if I'm writing something emotional and it's a 3-page scene, that's great if I did it, you know. Yeah. So I can't equate the two. The other difference is you would think at this point in my life, I would start a book and think, I got this. Absolutely not. Every time I start a book, I'm like, I don't know how to write a book. How do I do this again? You know, I'm surely the worst that's ever been. So I can't say the confidence is always there. Somehow it manages to, you know, pull itself together by the end. But yeah, I think all those insecurities still stay with you.
Yeah. And I'm curious about, you did write your YA book with your daughter.
You did,
right? And I was curious about that. How was that?
You know, I've had 2 co-authors in my life. One was Sammy and the other was Jennifer Finney Boylan. Sammy was the only one I could tell to go to her room. So, you know, Sammy was the one who came up with the idea for this series. It was 2 books. And I actually was in LA. I was on a book tour. I was stuck in traffic. And she called me and she said, I think I have a really good idea for a book. And I said, all right, hit me. And she said, what if every time you closed a book, the characters inside it had lives and personalities different from the roles that they played in the story? But you know, every time that you, the book was open, they had to act those out over and over again. And what if there was this girl who was kind of lonely and was obsessed with a kid's fairy tale because she thought that the prince in it was really attractive. And one day she realized that he wanted out of his story as much as she wanted out of hers. And I was like, wow, she's talking about a literary crush. Like, I'm still waiting for Mr. Darcy, yes. You know, and so I thought it would be really fun to write that with her and model it. And it turned out to be a great thing because she actually, like 3 weeks ago, just published her solo first middle grade novel.
Amazing.
So I'm very proud of her. But also, yeah, you should all read it. It's called The Extraterrestrial Zoo. I love it. I had nothing to do with it. She wouldn't even let me read it. But you know, it was really fun to work with her, and it was really challenging because I was really teaching her how to write. We literally wrote every word of those books out loud. We would take turns typing. And when we finished, we left the book on a cliffhanger. And I was like, okay, well, we're gonna write a sequel. And she was like, absolutely not, I'm never doing this again in my life. And then she was 16 when the book came out, and then she went to college. And one day she called me up from college and she's like, I've been thinking about the sequel. And I went, have you? And because she was busy and she was a college freshman, we literally wrote from 10 to 12 at night, every night, on speakerphone. And that was how we did the second book. So, but it was really fun. And then, you know, literally years later, Jenny Boylan dreamed that she was writing a book with me. And we teamed up to write Mad Honey. And that was, it was one of the best experiences. Oh, I'm so glad you liked it. Jenny, I mean, I got a great book out of it, but I also got a really great friend out of it. However, what I will tell you about Jenny is that Mad Honey is a mystery, and Jenny is a pantser, not a plotter. And if you're a writer, you know you're either a pantser or a plotter, right? And so she's like, yeah, I'm just gonna keep writing and we'll see where this goes. And I was like, Jenny, you can't write a mystery and not know who did it, you know? And so I basically had to teach Jenny how to plot a book. And it was very gratifying when she wrote her next book after that and told me that she had written an outline. Yeah, so I feel like my work here is done. Yeah,
absolutely. I also wanted to, because I'm in awe, but also very worried that you're always on tour and crisscrossing the world.
Yeah, I'm worried about that too.
Right?
Especially with the FAA right now.
I know. You flew in just last night, you're flying out tomorrow from here. But for this particular book, I want to come back to by any other name. You've done this amazing tour, global tour. Like, any things that was surprising, any kind of different reception depending on where you were, any fun stories? Yeah. I'm asking for myself. I'm sorry, audience. This is the question for myself.
So I asked specifically to do an event in Stratford-upon-Avon.
Yes.
Because, come on, how could I not? So I basically was like, here I am preaching, to the anti-choir. And there was this whole group of people, and they're all like this in the audience, like looking at me. And I'm letting it all out there. I literally went on and on. I told you about Othello. I gave them like 10 examples of texts where Amelia's fingerprints are all over the place. And afterward, we did this signing, and one by one, as people came up to me, they would come up like almost sheepishly to get their book signed, and then they would go, I never really thought it was all him. Like they all wanted me to know that they heard me and they thought maybe I was right, but they didn't want to say it out loud in a public setting. So that was actually quite funny. And the other thing that was really magical was when I was in England, we also did an event at the Victoria and Albert Museum with those 2 miniatures, which was really fun for the audience because they're not out in the collection. So people got to see them, and they heard me talking about them, but instead of looking at the slides, they were looking at the actual miniatures. And honestly, I felt so much pressure because Amelia was like right over there as I was telling her story, and I was just like, man, I hope I do her justice, It was funny.
That's great, that's great. And because you've been like outside of the country, coming back in, and also going around the country, like, I mean, these are not
normal times.
No. And so what worries you? Like,
everything. Are you kidding me? I literally, I got home from England 2 days ago because I was debuting something in the West End, another musical. And for the first time, I was flying in and I thought, I say some pretty anti-Trump things on my social media. Is this where I get, sent to Guantanamo today? Is that the day? Yeah. And I never had to think that before in my country. And as a white woman, I have so much privilege. And, it's shocking to be in that world, in this authoritarian regime. It's interesting to me that when I was on book tour for By Any Other Name, my largest crowds were in the reddest of states. This was pre-election, and I had 1,800 people in Iowa and Omaha, and I would talk about how women are treated differently than men through the lens of By Any Other Name. And I would say, you really only have to look at the current election and candidates to understand that this is still happening. And the deafening roar of agreement stunned me. I do believe that when you're in like a particularly red area and someone who tends to be very outwardly progressive comes in, people flock to that because they're hungry for it. It's like an oasis in a desert. So yes, I was definitely speaking to people who were like-minded. But yeah, it was really sad, actually, to be on tour for this book, to be talking about the discrepancies between the way men and women are treated and the way men have been rewriting history, and to do that pre-election, and now to be sitting here in 2025 and to literally watch history being rewritten by these men who I do not trust and do not think have the wherewithal or the talent or the intelligence to lead this country.
Yeah. Do you?
Okay, guys, odds that I'm stopped at LAX tomorrow.
Yeah.
This event.
I mean, actually, that was my next question. I was like, do you? It is a real question that we all have to ask ourselves.
Yeah, it's scary.
No, in terms of what we do professionally.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think about being less vocal?
I have had so many conversations about this with my husband, with friends of mine. I have a really good friend who I really admire. She's a Quaker. She is probably the most balanced person in my life. She is so good at being able to look at someone who has a different point of view and say, I don't agree with you, but I want to hear what you have to say. Because to be completely blunt, I am not quite there yet. And in case I didn't make that clear yet. And so she said to me that she was afraid to speak out and to say something because she was worried about ramifications. And I keep thinking, I think a lot about history. One of the one of the librettos that I've been working on for the past 8 years is an adaptation of Marcus Zusak's beautiful book, The Book Thief, right? Gorgeous, gorgeous book about Nazi Germany, about authoritarian regimes. And I actually literally found out that my book was being banned at one point while I was watching a prop book being burned on a stage. It was very meta. But I think about that a lot because I do see history repeating itself. And I don't know that any of us knew we would be so blatantly tested. I think we all want to believe we would fight. I think we all want to believe we would have courage. But when push comes to shove, you know, do you want to make yourself a target? And I think for me, I don't know that I could live with myself if I didn't speak my truth. And I think that's why I am taking the risk. It's really scary. Yeah. It's really, really scary. I also do have a son who's a lawyer, so hopefully if something goes wrong, he can get me out, you know, but it is really, it's really worrisome. And we were talking about this before, but I keep thinking about Marcus's book, and I keep thinking about Jews in Nazi Germany, and when they knew it was time to leave their home, because nobody wants to leave their home. And I love my country. I don't want it co-opted for me. You know, I don't want to leave New Hampshire. You're all very lucky to be in California, but you know, I don't want to give up by moving away, and yet this isn't the country that I signed up for.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a few minutes, and is it fair to ask you what you're working on?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, right now what I'm working on is figuring out what time zone I'm in, actually. But so the book that I'm writing now will come out in 2026, and so it comes from I don't know if you guys remember it was an old website called Post Secret. Do you remember that? Anyone, right? So it was a website, then it became an Instagram handle, and basically people would send in their deepest, darkest secrets on a postcard, and then they would be published anonymously. And the secret could be anything from like, on Friday I come home and I take off all my clothes and I don't put them on again until Monday when I go to work, to my husband doesn't know our second kid isn't his, right? Anything. And so once I read a Post Secret that said, everyone who knew me before 9/11 thinks that I'm dead. And I was like, what? That's a book. And so that is what my 2026 book is about.
Okay.
What would make someone leave, but also, more importantly, what would make you come back? What is the difference between a personal tragedy and a public one? Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll just have to wait, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean.
2026, right, you said?
We hope, yeah, 2026, yeah.
Okay, stop going on tour. I am so happy that we convinced you to make a stopover
this is
here
great.
in LA.
Yeah, that stopover from London to LA back to New Hampshire, definitely.
Yes, just in time for Saturday cruising event.
I want to thank the people who didn't go home.
Yes.
Thank you for sticking around.
Yes. So I want to thank you to those of you who came. I thank you so much for being so generous with what you shared today.
Absolutely, thank you.
And let's do it again.
Let's do it. Sounds good.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much.